Welcome into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. I'm Joey Van Zimmer, and I cover football and basketball for the site, and it has been an eventful week for Mizzou athletics. Really, just this past Tuesday has been exciting with Damon Wilson, the former Georgia edge rusher, committing to Missouri over Ohio State and Texas, and then also Missouri basketball upsetting number 5 Florida on the road, moving on to 3-1 in SEC play. So a lot to talk about today. I'm joined by Michael Sampson. As always, Michael, how are you doing in a hectic week here from Mizzou?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. A lot of stuff happening that many people probably at one certain point in time, probably wouldn't have imagined happening. I know, the Damon Wilson story probably took both of us by a little bit of surprise. Obviously, we didn't know what was going behind the scenes, but still to land somebody of that caliber, with Missouri is pretty impressive from this coaching staff, and he presents as a great fit and just a monumental recruiting win. There's been a lot of those in the last couple of years, from Luther Burden to Williams Nwaneri, and I'm not going to put Damon Wilson in that same category yet because there needs to be some more impact on the field. But as far as the transfer portal goes, you'd have to think that's their best pickup there. And then pretty incredible, ugly, disgusting win at Florida. That was one of the harder basketball games to watch that I've ever watched. But the fact that they were able to grit that out, walk away with a victory, especially after Florida went on a run, which was going to happen. I mean, the 5th best team in the country isn't going to just drop and roll over at home when a team that's technically not supposed to beat them is beating them. So they survived that Florida run, and I guess were resilient and walked away with a win, regardless of any of the circumstances, which was really impressive. So two major wins for both of the teams this week, and I think it's very good for momentum building moving forward.
Absolutely. When you talk about the Wilson commit, I mean, I think the biggest thing, obviously, you want him to produce on the field. Wasn't a full-time starter for Georgia this past season, but he was top player available in the portal, top 10 player that has entered the portal this season, depending on what rankings you cite. But just the fact that, like you mentioned, Michael, to be able to win the offseason basically, and not saying they're running away with that title or anything, but there's a lot of talk in the NFL a lot about teams that can only win in the offseason then don't produce on the field. And I'm not saying Missouri won't produce on the field, but in college it does matter a little bit more to have those wins in the offseason, because it really is a point of being able to establish yourself as a program when you can get a Damon Wilson to commit. And obviously, again, they want him to produce on the field, but to be able to, obviously, money plays a big part in it, but to be able to sway a guy away from Ohio State while they are preparing for a national championship is something notable for this program. And as far as at least rankings go, again, doesn't always translate to on-field production. Damon Wilson is their highest of all time in the transfer portal. So big ad there. As far as who he is as a player, like you mentioned, Michael, I think it's going to be a good fit. I mentioned my immediate reaction to it. He's a very similar size to Johnny Walker. Johnny is, I believe, 6'4", 250. No, that's Wilson, and then Johnny was 6'3", 250. Wilson is a little bit more wider, I would say. Looks like he could play inside linebacker, almost a similar frame to Darius Smith, his Georgia teammate. So excited to see what he adds there. And we were talking about the edge position not too long ago on this podcast, multiple times, really, on how that shapes up. And obviously, they have to be excited about Nate Johnson, but I think with Smith, you have a little bit more proven potential. And Nate Johnson, I mean, both of them are going to be question marks, quite frankly, because they are both young. But I would think Smith has that starting position locked up on the opposite side of Zion Young. And obviously, they do like to rotate their edges quite a bit. So I think we'll see all three of those guys play quite a bit. And Ja'Kai Lane in that mix as well, Eddie Kelly as well. So they're pretty much set at that edge position, I would say, with two really highly touted transfer commits there. So it should be an exciting position. I mean, Michael, what do you think of Smith as a player?
The one thing that stood out about Damon Wilson right away to me, he seems like a really good run defender, and he's super patient. You know, once he beats his offensive tackle, he seems super patient in the backfield and is decisive and composed in making his decision. He's a good finisher once he gets to quarterback, running back, whoever he's chasing. And then I I preach this choir a lot, but you don't get ranked that high out of high school, um, and I guess the transfer portal, but primarily in high school, you don't get that 5-star ranking if you're not an incredible athlete. He was on 24/7 Sports 2023 Freaks list, which is just their super athletic high school football recruiting rankings. He was number 4 on that list, I believe, next and ahead of some very productive and incredibly athletic players. I think I read that he was bench pressing like 370 pounds in high school. So monster of an athlete. And you, like I said, you don't get that recruiting ranking out of high school if you're not an incredible athlete. My point being, he has the closing speed and he's a pretty sound tackler as well. So I think, and I'm sure we're going to get into this here in a second, and you kind of mentioned it, but the implication of uh, Missouri beating out Ohio State and presumably Texas for a prized, a prize transfer like Wilson. And you made a good point too that Ohio State's competing for a national championship. I really didn't even think of that initially, but the fact that Missouri was able to pry him away is so impressive, just on a national scale as far as drawing eyes to your program. Um, Also worth noting that I would like to think Wilson probably had the best opportunity to start day one with Missouri, which we might learn more about what NIL he's getting later. We might not. That's a question mark. Obviously, it's hard to say it wasn't involved, but the opportunity to start right away and play right away at Missouri, I would imagine is there compared to Ohio State and Texas. Now they know what they have, and I guess we really don't. But the opportunity to start at Missouri was right there, waiting right in front of him. So I would imagine that was a big part of his decision. But he is, yeah. I mean, if you're talking about, filling holes, Johnny Walker filled the role of Darius Robinson, and then you're presumably going to have the guy to fill the hole of Johnny Walker. So pretty monumental pickup.
And was I just calling Damon Wilson Damon Smith?
You might have been.
Okay. Two different players, Damon Wilson and Darius Smith, two different players, but both probably making an impact for Missouri in this upcoming season. And it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned some of those other additions and just how they're working the salary cap. And obviously, we don't know the details of all these additions, but just to it's been pretty impressive to see how they've managed kind of all of these high-end additions through the transfer portal. I mean, it's great to make as many additions as you can, but at some point it's got to cost you. And to have Bo Prabula allegedly making 1.5 million that's a hefty check on the balance. And obviously, you would think they're with Brady Cook and Luther Burden both leaving. That's probably a big relief on their salary cap, and then also Williams Nwaneri as well. So interesting to see how they've been working this so far. So that's the Damon Wilson commit. Excited to see him in the spring. And then next up, today we got the news Thursday that Missouri has hired or is expected to hire Derek Nicholson to replace DJ Smith as the school's linebacker coach. Smith, obviously, he was a longtime member on Drinkwitz's staff. They first met 2019 at Appalachian State, and then DJ Smith just this past December accepted the defense coordinator job at App State. So overall, I think we talked about it in the last episode, overall a good thing for Missouri to have guys getting promotions out, even if they're losing staff members. Derek Nicholson, the summary on him seems to be a good recruiter. Looking at his 247 Sports profile, just the guys he's recruited there, definitely has some connections in the Florida area, which is Missouri, as all schools are always trying to dive into that talent pool there. So that's that. I mean, it's hard with position coaches to really make too much of it. I know I already saw people on Twitter calling it a home run hire. And it's like, I mean, we've never seen him coach. We don't know. I haven't dived too much into the production of Miami's linebackers. They have a guy who was named to the second team All ACC the past 2 seasons, which is good on Nicholson's resume. But it's difficult to know on the outside exactly how much influence a position coach is having. I think it's interesting the fact that it's a lateral move, and even if he was co-defense coordinator at Miami as well. If he doesn't take on that role at Missouri, I mean, kind of a demotion, if anything. So I think that's interesting for two schools that are pretty much at a pretty similar level. And that's all I have to say on that. Any thoughts on the hire, Michael?
I mean, it happened while I was asleep, so yeah, I don't haven't had the opportunity to look too much into it yet. But I guess he comes from a big school. He's experienced. Spent 2020 to 2022 at Louisville, a couple years at Southern Miss, a season at Alcorn State, another season at Louisville. Started his coaching career with Akron as a linebackers coach. Was trying to see if he's coached any notable guys. The only one besides I believe it's is it Mauagoa from Miami, Francisco Mauagoa, tentative. These last 2 seasons, Yasir Abdullah, who I believe's in the NFL now, but I don't know which team he plays for. He coached him at Louisville. Other than that, I can't find any super notable names. That's not necessarily an indicator of how good a coach he is. Just trying to add some names to it, but he has experience, and I think I did read that he was a good recruiter, and having any sort of recruiting tie, regardless of where your program is in Florida, is always can't hurt. And Missouri hasn't really had any issues with that. Obviously, there's like 6 guys on this team from St. Thomas Aquinas, so just adding to that, I guess. But it's never a bad thing to dip your feet into that recruiting pool. So I guess that's a positive. But kind of like you said, it's hard to kind of judge what they bring to the table until they start playing football. So not really going to be able to get a good read on what we're getting from Derek Nicholson. Doesn't seem like it's a bad thing at all, but like I said, we're going to have to wait a little while to see how good he really is. That being said, he's got a lot to work with. Not saying it's more or less than what he had at Miami, but there's definitely talent in the room. He also coached Corey Flagg, probably. So that's, I guess, worth mentioning. But yeah, I mean, he has a lot of talent to work with in the room. So I guess that's a good start for him. But yeah, kind of hard to say a lot or know a lot about a position coach when we haven't really seen his unit play.
Yeah, and I tried to look for any sort of connection he had to any current Missouri staff members and struggled to find any overlap. Yeah, Corey Flagg was about the only one I could think of, and he's obviously not on the team anymore. So there's that. That's that hire, and Missouri doesn't have anybody else to replace on this coaching staff. They did have a offensive line assistant who accepted a job at Florida State, so they could hire someone there, but not necessarily a essential. So that's about it for the coaching staff. All in all, compared to last year, especially, not a terrible year as far as the coaching staff being rummaged. Losing Baker and Kevin Peoples last year was obviously a big loss, but I would say Eli Drinkwood's pretty happy with Corey Batoon's first season. So that's it for our football talk today. On the other side of this break here, we're going to be joined by Chase James, our lead basketball reporter, to talk all things Mizzou basketball as they get ready for a matchup against Arkansas. Now joined by Chase James as Missouri is coming off a 3-game SEC win streak, looking to make it 4. I looked this up. Missouri has only had, if they win on Saturday against Arkansas, it'll be a 4-game SEC win streak. They've only had that twice before since joining the SEC. One of those they extended to 5. One only lasted until 4. So good streak they've got going on right now. Chase, just what have your initial reactions been for this team early on in SEC play?
Yeah, since we've gone to break, I've just been really impressed with this team. Obviously, before we left, Kansas happened, and that was a big deal. But to see if they would continue that in the SEC play, it was kind of unknown. And they lost to Illinois early on or later on in December, but they're undefeated. Well, not undefeated, but they're 3-1 in SEC right now. Beat number 5 Florida. Huge win. Arguably more impressive than Kansas. I think Florida was in a better position than Kansas was. Kansas was kind of reeling, but Florida has been dominant in the SEC. So getting that win, it kind of shows that this team is legit, and March Madness seems very realistic if they continue this going forward.
Right. It's been interesting to watch the top of the SEC really and kind of see Missouri try to converge into that. And I think there's just going to be a lot of movement in those top 8 to 12 teams that are going to be worthy of making the tournament. And like you mentioned, Florida, and just a week before they lost to Missouri, they held Tennessee to 43 points. A dominant performance. Tennessee was ranked number 1 at the time. And I would love to see the math, because there's obviously at some point there's only so many teams that can have 9-10 wins in the conference because they all play each other, obviously. So it's going to be an interesting February to watch not only Missouri, but everything that goes on in the SEC. You mentioned just that the impressiveness of the Florida win, how much they put that on the resume. I would agree with you. I think it is more impressive than Kansas, not only because of the way that Kansas has been playing. They're still a top 25 team, but maybe not the formidable number 1 team in the country they had at the start of the season. And then this Florida one, and also even in their wins against Vanderbilt, which wasn't obviously not a very formidable team, but in both of those wins, I was just really impressed with the endurance they showed. That's been a buzzword for them lately, endurance. They say that Coach Gates always talks to them about it. And especially, I would think a lot of that is from last year and how many falls they would have in the second half. And Florida to have, obviously, both sides got kind of the short end of the stick on some things. There's obviously the Caleb Grill Phantom 3. There's as Josh Gray pointed out on Twitter, the goaltending that maybe should have been called on Florida. A lot of officiating decisions, and ultimately they're going to miss some things. But I think ultimately Missouri was the better team and for those 40 minutes. And even if they ended up losing that game by whatever happens in those last 2 minutes, would have been a game that Missouri would be really proud of for good reason. You lose Tony Perkins to the ejection. You have Ant Robinson, Mark Mitchell, Marcus Allen all in foul trouble. And to have T.O. Barrett slide in to that lineup and in the last 6 minutes, I mean, his only job really in that moment is to not mess it up, not do anything that's going to cost the team. And he not only does that, but then make some impressive plays, not just for a freshman, but period, make some impressive plays. So that's kind of what I want to talk about first off here is just this team's ability to win in multiple different ways. They've hammered in on the depth all season long, but I think once you get into conference play, obviously you're not going to be relying on 11, 12 guys deep. Dennis is always going to run deeper rotations, but they're not going to be throwing out, I was going to say freshmen, but T.O. Barrett, what I just said about him disproves this point, but not going to be throwing out as many guys they don't have as much trust in SEC play. But the fact that, like I said, T.O. Barrett is the antithesis to that, to have multiple deep lineups that are going in there and producing, I think is impressive. Michael, what do you have to say about that? Just the way they've been playing, being able to win in multiple different ways too.
Well, speaking to the depth, it's easy to compare this year to last year, obviously, because they're winning games this year and they, weren't last year. But, last year when you look at the depth, there was a lot of guys on the team, a lot of guys on the roster, right? But they're just not a lot of playmakers. It's kind of hard to pick somebody who won't go into the game off this bench and make a play of some sort, which I think is really impressive. All the way down, Marcus Allen, Marquez Warwick, Jacob Cruz hit a shot, Josh Gray, was impactful on both sides of the ball, and then obviously T.O. Barrett. So, not every game's going to go the same way, and not everything. Excuse me. Not everything's going to go how they want it to go. Obviously, I would imagine there's some sort of script, or they want to hammer out these certain things, and those are their keys to victory. That's just not always going to be the case. I also thought the game was just in general super disrupted and just no flow and super choppy, which probably favored Missouri in a sense, because Florida just wasn't really able to garner momentum, in that last stretch of that game. But yeah, you said it. They can win in multiple different ways. When they're not shooting well, they can get inside to attack the rim. They were still getting to the free throw line. I mean, 29 free throw attempts is outrageous, regardless of if there are fouls or not. I guess Florida, shot 31, but that's still a ton. So they were still able to get to the free throw line. I think defense is a staple of this team, and I think T.O. Barrett really brought that to the plate in that final 5 minutes. Really, minus the offensive production, I thought he did a lot of what Ant Robinson normally does. Saw a lot of Ant Robinson in him, bigger physical point guard. Made a good pass, little dump down pass to Mark Mitchell. But really, he was, swarming Walter Clayton, who had an incredible night to that point. And I don't remember. I still think he scored, but still didn't make his life easy. But yeah, the depth in this team is incredible and very impressive. And now at this point, especially when you can put a guy like T.O. Barrett into the game with that much time left on the clock, and he can go not screw things up, that's really, really, really impressive, and says a lot about this depth and a lot about this team.
I think the part of the depth that's most impressive to me is it's not really like, I do think they have a deep roster, but I think it's also just the fact that they have guys that can do different things, and that they're really sound in a lot of areas. They've been much better at rebounding early on in SEC play. They go up against Florida and Auburn, and they lose the rebounding battle against Auburn by 1, I believe, despite being wrecked in that game. I think it was around a 20-point loss. And similar to Florida, I think it was either tied or with 1 or 2, that whoever ended up winning that one. They've been rebounding really well. Obviously, Mark Mitchell, Josh Gray, a big part of that. Caleb Grill has been a great shooter for them, continuing into SEC play. And then it's just going to be in those big games. You can obviously have a sound team, but who's going to step up in those big moments? And it's kind of been different in different circumstances, but I think Tamar Bates and Ant Robinson definitely have that ability. It was Tamar against Kansas, and Ant had a good game there too. And for Robinson, it's just been, I think he still has a little bit of a ways to go to be that just incredible point guard control on the court that we saw early on this season. And he's had some low moments, but he's also clearly developing in the right way. So, I mean, Chase, what do you have to say about this? That just this team's just kind of foundation and where they're at right now.
Yeah, and kind of to Michael's point about the depth, last year they just didn't have the guys to do this. But every player down the lineup pretty much right now, like you could plug in and pretty much be safe that they're going to do something right. If you have a problem, you can plug it in. And we've talked about T.O. Barrett already, but that was the shining example of the season. Before the season, I don't think people really thought T.O. Barrett was going to play much at all. He seemed like one of the freshmen, kind of like the odd man out, but he's proven that he could arguably be the most playable freshman just because he can come in and be consistent and defend at a high level. This team right now, to me, it's a little shaky because the SEC is so dominant. I don't know what their ceiling is at a record level, because eventually they're going to start losing to these teams that are higher up. It's impossible to see them beating all these top ranked teams, but they're putting themselves definitely at the top right now, and I could see them finishing towards the middle. They have guys that you can trust. They don't have, I don't think, a standout player necessarily, but you can expect Caleb Grill, Anthony Robinson II, Tamar Bates, even Mark Mitchell. You can expect those guys to take over at any night and get them wins. So I think this team, it could be like in the 8 to 9 range once the NCAA tournament comes around.
Yeah, they're gonna be a really unpredictable tournament team if things continue to go well for them and they end up making it, because I think a lot of it is matchup opponent specific, but they can go in there against Florida and not completely control, but be in that game for all 40 minutes, and for the first 18 of it being complete control of it. But then also they go up against Auburn and, you know, lay an egg. It was obviously the SEC opener for them. They said that things just weren't clicking. They weren't in the right rhythm in that one. So who knows? And I think the separation between Auburn and pretty much everyone else is a pretty wide gap. But still, I mean, the fact that they can go and host Kansas and win, play Florida and win, not only to be able to hang with these teams, but also win. And Illinois is the exception to that. And I think what also makes them unpredictable is just the way Dennis Gates likes to play basketball, of just wanting to jump out to that early lead, run you off the court. And obviously, like, if that works, then it's great. And we've seen that this season. They had a 19-point lead against Florida in the first half there, had a big lead over Kansas in the first half. But if it doesn't work, then you're kind of, swimming in against the current there. I would say Illinois is kind of the exception to that, where Illinois had a good start and they were kind of able to reestablish themselves. Something obviously just came up short at the end there, but Illinois kind of had control of that for all 40 minutes again, and Missouri was trying to swim against the current. So what you mentioned, Chase, about the ceiling for this team, as far as what actually happens in the tournament, is anybody's guess. Again, a lot of it is matchup specific, and I think that's the other thing about this team is just the way that they've been game planning. And going back to the deep roster point, you have T.O. Barrett and Peyton Marshall, who are kind of the two freshmen that Marcus Allen playing quite a bit too, but Barrett and Marshall have kind of been guys that they will hold off for maybe 2 or 3 games, maybe not play at all, and then the next game be big parts of the game plan, especially Marshall. He's just been an unpredictable force in there. So it's been interesting to see the lineups for this team each night. Michael, any thoughts on the ceiling for this team?
No, I don't even know how to predict it. It is nice to know though that the win against Kansas isn't a fluke, which was not a unreasonable claim to make, right? I mean, you're at home, you have all the fans, you've been successful that season. Maybe just all the stars aligned and you beat one of the best teams in the country. I don't think it sounds crazy, but I don't think that's that unrealistic. You have a hot shooting night. But they played, they didn't play bad against Illinois. And then obviously on the road at Florida, like Chase said earlier, is a 10 times more impressive win. I believe it was the opening night at Auburn in the SEC where only one team won on the road. It was Vanderbilt at LSU, and they barely did it. And a couple teams have since, but winning on the road in this conference is going to be so impressive. So I think that helps. And when you look into the tournament, obviously a win against Kansas and a win against Florida on the road is a massive resume booster. It's going to be important now because obviously wins and losses and metric rankings and that stuff are such a massive part of the selection at this point, and where we're at and how they determine who gets in. Missouri's got to do a lot to be a lock, so I wouldn't expect that. I think if I were to throw a number out there right now, anywhere from like maybe 8, 9, 10 seed probably seems realistic. It's not unrealistic to imagine Missouri's going to drop a couple games that they should win. But now we know they can go into places and win games that they shouldn't win. So maybe that'll level each other out. Winning one of those big games, I don't know the schedule off the top of my head, but maybe goodness, A&M at home, Alabama at home, Kentucky at home. Winning one more, I'm not saying they should win. They probably won't be favored or any of that stuff, but winning one of those would also go a long way in the NCAA tournament, but you just don't want to drop the ones that you should win. So right now, 8, 9, 10 seed seems realistic. Florida and Kansas look great on the resume. I'm sure Cal probably helps a little bit as well, but they just got to keep chugging along. Kind of a win the games you need to win. If you lose the ones you're supposed to lose, it's not the end of the world. Just don't let, you don't want more bad losses than obviously really good wins. So 8, 9, 10 seed tentative prediction, but a lot can change between now and March.
Absolutely. And this game against Arkansas, I wouldn't say it's a game they should win or lose. It's going to be an interesting one. Arkansas has hard to evaluate because they have some resume building wins. They beat Michigan, they beat Kansas, but they've also started SEC play with 4 straight losses, and it's not like they've went through the ringer of the SEC schedule necessarily. They've had some games that they should have won on there as well. So I'll throw it to both of you on any thoughts on this Arkansas team.
Yeah, I think before the season started, Arkansas had a little higher expectations when they're at now. Because obviously you bring in Calipari, that's a big name that you think could change the program a little bit. But it seems like since they've gotten to SEC play, it's kind of been all over the place, shooting the ball, rebounding. And funny enough, they're kind of similar to how Missouri was last year, where they'll get these leads in the first half, and then the second half it completely collapses. So they're a little unpredictable, I would agree. I don't think this is a cakewalk by any means, but losing to LSU the way they did, it's a little embarrassing. And they're definitely a beatable team, especially being at home too. So I would say it would be a disappointment if Missouri lost this game, but obviously they can't walk in at home and expect it to be an easy win.
Yeah, I agree with you, Chase. If this game's on the road, the expectations are different. I think solely because, excuse me, solely because it's a home game, I would say Missouri should probably walk away with a win, but I don't think it is an unrealistic claim to make that Arkansas is probably more talented. They have the star value. Their roster is certainly expensive. That's not, hidden knowledge at all. I think part of it is like they lack a certain unity and cohesion. They get kind of hero bally, at least from when I've watched them. But you have guys like Fland and Wagner and Janelle Davis who are pretty elite guards, and they just sometimes their decision making is so puzzling because they're great players and they've done it in the past. I guess with Davis and Wagner, they've done it in the past, but sometimes they just can't. They make just such confusing decisions. And I know Fland's a freshman too, so that's part of growing. And I to counter your point, Joey, they've lost to Tennessee, Florida, and Ole Miss, so they were in winnable positions at certain points. So I guess that makes those losses frustrating, but that's a pretty tough stretch in my opinion to start. Now LSU is unexcusable, but that's besides the point. They're very versatile though. They have a lot of guys that can kind of beat you in different ways, similar to Missouri. I think it's interesting that they really, besides Adu, I'm pretty sure everyone is willing to shoot from the perimeter, which creates some interesting matchups. If you have, Gray out there or Marshall out there, obviously Mitchell can defend the perimeter to a certain extent, but they have a lot of shooters at every position, which I think is going to be an interesting case. But yeah, I think solely because this game's at home, and they're going to have the crowd momentum, and I would imagine it'll be a pretty good atmosphere with students starting to trickle back in and all that stuff, and especially given the Vanderbilt game. I'm not going to say I expect them to win because, like I said, very talented team, and when Arkansas clicks, they click. Obviously, they have, they've done some impressive stuff this season. But I think because it's at home, give Missouri the nod, but don't expect to walk in and win because Arkansas is playmakers, and if everything's going right, they can definitely ruin a night.
Yeah, I should take my comment back about their schedule after looking it over again. They had some tough opponents to start there, but yeah, like you mentioned, Michael, school starts back up on this Tuesday, so I'd imagine there's going to be a lot of students coming back for this game early, and it was interesting. With the Vanderbilt game was a sellout, but I mean there was hardly any students there, so I think it's going to be a fun atmosphere. It's a rivalry game. I think much more in basketball than football, so going to be a fun one to watch. And like I said, getting 4 straight SEC wins, I think would put a lot of people on notice to Missouri. So that's going to wrap it up for us today on the All Things Mizzou podcast. We appreciate you tuning in and hope you do the same for the rest of our coverage on Missouri on SI.